So let's go ahead and create a simple countdown script that will destroy our particle effects before they clog up all of our hierarchy over here. So we're going to go into our scripts folder. We're going to create a new C# script that we'll call destroy over time, and it's a very simple script. All we require is just a set amount of time for our script to last for, and then when the time counts down, we'll destroy the object it's attached to. So we'll just say public float lifetime, and that'll be how long our object lasts. We won't worry about the start function at all, but in our update we'll just say, okay, start counting down our time. So how we do that is say lifetime minus equals time.delta time. So we're just taking it down and taking time away. And then we say if our lifetime is less than 0, so we've ran out of time, then destroy game object. So we're destroying the game object that this script is attached to. So we save that, go back in here, we let that compile, and once it's done we'll go over to our prefabs here, and then on our laser impact we're going to add that script to it. So we're going to go add component, and we'll add our destroy over time, and we'll give it a lifetime of 1 second because that's how long we have the duration of our laser going for. Although the lifetime of it is half a second, we'll just let it be at 1 second. Actually, no, we'll change it to be 0.75. That's absolutely fine. So we'll now that that's been changed onto prefab, that'll be changed on all our lasers. So we can hit play, and now if I shoot a load of bullets at this asteroid, you can see our laser impacts are staying there for a few seconds and then disappearing. Perfect. That's exactly what we want them to do. So now that our player can get hurt by things, let's add a way for him to be able to fire back and launch some deadly lasers back at our enemies. So to do that, we're going to start off by going into our art folder, and we're going to pull from our sprite sheet of various things here. We're going to pull this little blue laser looking thing. I'm just going to drop that in front of our spaceship right here. I'm going to rename this to be player laser, and the only thing we want to do, well, obviously we want to be able to move this laser, but we also want it to be able to interact with other objects in the world. And of course, to do that, we're going to need to give it a box collider. So we'll give it a box collider 2D like this, and you see now we have the little green outline around our laser down here. And we also want to make sure that this is a trigger box collider, so that when our laser hits against another object, say this asteroid for example, it won't knock the asteroid kind of into a weird position or make it start spinning around or anything like that. We don't want that. We don't want our laser kind of hitting against something and being a solid object. We want it to just kind of interact with it by being an area where some action will happen, basically. So now that we have it set up as a box collider and we have a little image, let's go ahead and create a script to go with it to make it move across the screen from left to right. So we're going to go into our scripts folder and create a new C# script that we will call the bullet controller script, and we'll open this up over here in MonoDevelop. Give it a second. Okay, so if we're going to move our bullet across the screen, we're going to need an amount of speed that it's going to take to do that. So let's go ahead and say public force move speed, like that. And then we're going to need to have an actual way of moving it. Now, we've moved other objects in the world with using rigid body forces to push it around and stuff like that, but we're going to be doing a lot of these lasers. They're going to be constantly firing them out from the player as we go, so we don't really want to have them all be being controlled by physics, because if we have a load of lasers all being controlled by physics, it can start making things a little bit hectic for the computer. If the computer is controlling a lot of physics-based objects around the world, then it can start slowing things down and getting your game kind of bogged down. We don't really want that. So what we'll do is just do the simple way of moving the transform position of our object through the world. So let's do that in our update loop here. We're just going to say here our transform dot position equals a new vector tree And we're only going to worry about moving it on the x-axis, because our laser, we don't need our laser to go up and down, we only need to move it to the side, and we also only need to worry about it moving to the right. Our laser isn't going to go to the left for any reason, so we'll just say here, new vector tree, on the x-axis we're going to say whatever our current transform.position.x, we will add on our move speed, and we're going to multiply that by our time.delta time. So we'll just make sure we put them in brackets so we're sure that they'll be executed as one thing together, but they should, due to the way that mathematical logic works, a multiply should happen before an addition over here, but we can just make it explicit and put some brackets around it. So that's why we say move speed by time.delta time, put it in the brackets, and add that onto our current transform position. And then on our y-axis, we don't want to change wherever we are at the moment, so we'll stick that as transform.position.y. And as usual, on the z-axis, we don't want to make any changes either, so we'll say transform.position.z and hit that semicolon. And we'll just save this. And one final thing we want to do is make sure that whenever our bullet interacts with something else, we'll obviously want it to do damage to other things, but most importantly, we want it to destroy itself when it impacts against something, because we don't want our laser flying across the screen forever and ever. So as soon as it interacts with anything in the world, it goes, okay, no, I'm destroyed now. So to do that, we'll use our void on trigger enter 2D, like that. And in between our little brackets here, we want to make sure and say we're checking to see what is the collider other that is interacting with our on trigger enter. So that's how we'll check what thing we're interacting with. But now that we know we're interacting, or that we're interacting with something at all, we just say, okay, destroy our bullet. So destroy the game object that this script is attached to. Okay, so we just got that saved. Let's pop back into Unity and we'll let that compile. Oh, we got a bit of an error here. What have we got? On line 16. Oh, I just realized when I went to type in float up here, for some reason it got auto changed to force mode. So that's not very useful at all. We want this to be a public float for move speed, not a public force mode. So that was why we were getting a weird error down here. So if we go back into Unity now, we should be absolutely okay. Sometimes the autocorrect on Mono Developed over here can be a bit, can throw you out with some different things than what you're looking for by accident. But that's okay, we got that compiled and it's all fine. So let's go to our laser. We're going to give it the, where is it? There you go, bullet controller script. I lost it there for a second. We're going to set the move speed. I'm going to set it to 15, so it goes faster than our ship moves. And if we press play, we'll see, boom, our laser goes forward and hits our asteroid. But of course, at the moment, we can't fire our laser at all. So let's go ahead and add the ability for our ship to fire multiple lasers. So we're going to want our ship to be able to fire lasers as we're flying along through the game. Now to do that, we're going to need to know what is the laser that we're bringing into the scene. So we can't just use the laser that's currently in the scene, because that one's going to be flying off to the side and we don't really want to do that. We want to make this a prefab that we can use over and over again. So we'll go to our prefabs folder and we'll drop our player laser in there. Might as well drop also the asteroid in there while we're here, because we're going to want to reuse that object over and over again as well. And now that we've got the player laser in there, I'm going to delete it from our scene. And we're going to go to our player and I'm going to right click on him and create an empty child that we're going to rename to be fire point. And this is going to be the point in space where our lasers are going to shoot out of. So I'm going to move this so it's a little bit in front of our ship, like that, so that our lasers will fire out from just in front of the ship and go towards our enemies. So now that we have that, what we need to do is go and add the ability to fire our lasers into our player controller script. So we'll open that back up over here in Mono Develop. We've got it over here. Now to be able to fire the lasers, obviously we're going to need a reference to what is the object that we're going to fire. So we're going to say public game object, we'll just call it the bullet, nice and simple. I usually kind of stick to the naming convention of no matter what game I'm making, if we're firing something, it's a bullet. Whether it's an arrow, a laser, an actual bullet, or a rocket, it's easier to just keep it generic and keep everything referred to as a bullet. So we have the bullet that we're going to fire, then we have the space that we're going to fire our bullet from. So we'll say public transform bullet point. So that's where we're going to fire our laser from, and that's pretty much all we need as a reference to when we're firing. So how are we going to check and see how we're actually firing our bullets? Well, we basically need to check and see when our player presses any button that we want to use to fire our weapons. Now we could set up that to be a specific key, like we could set it to be one of the keys on the keyboard, like J or something like that, or the player to press enter or press space, or we could also set it to be a specific mouse button that we press. But what we're going to use is the button system that we used for moving our player's input. So when we looked at that, if we go back to it again, we go to edit and project settings and input. If we look at it again, we have some other buttons over here for fire 1, which is, it can be like left control or the mouse button down 0. We have fire 2 and all of this stuff. So we have some options. And again, fire 1 also will work as, on a controller, it'll be the A button, say, on the Xbox 360 controller, or it'll be the X button on a PlayStation controller. So we have those options available, so let's take advantage of that. So we'll go back into our script, and then down below here we're going to say if input dot get button down. So when we're using these inputs over here, we're checking for a button being pressed. We're not checking for a key being pressed. Whereas previously we've used get key down, now we're using get button down. So when we say input dot get button down, and the button we want to check for is fire 1. Oh, I needed an extra bracket to close that there. Fix up these indentations. There we go. Okay, so we've got our input.get button down fire 1, which is absolutely perfect. And then in here, we're going to run a simple bit of code to make our bullets appear. So we'll just say instantiate, and then in a bracket we say the object we want to instantiate, which will be our bullet. We want to say where it'll appear, which will be at our bullet point dot position. And then we want to say what rotation it will have, and that will be bullet point dot rotation. Like that. Okay, so we'll save this, pop back in here to Unity, and we'll have to, of course, hook up those things that we created on our player. So we'll go to our player here, scroll down. We see we have a slot for our bullet and our bullet points. So let's put the fire point in there. We'll go to our prefabs, and we'll put the player, oh, we lost it here. We'll put the player laser into our bullet slot. Okay, so now if we play the game, what we should get is whenever the player presses the mouse button down, we can fire lasers, which is great. Now we can actually do some damage in the game, and now it's starting to feel more like a real game and more like we're actually doing something as we go. But what about the fact that I've just shot off loads and loads of these bullets, and now if we look over here in our hierarchy, there's loads of copies of the bullets left in the game. So if I just pause this for a second, when we're here in our scene view, if I just click on one of them, if we zoom out, all those lasers are still in the world. They're just flying off to the right forever and ever and ever, and we really don't want that to be happening. If we keep doing that, we'll have so many lasers added up over here, and it'll just end up with our game slowing down massively. So that's no good to us. So what we're going to do is make sure that they're automatically destroyed as soon as they leave the screen. And there's a very, very simple way to do that. What we can do is go into our bullet controller, and then down the very bottom here, we can just say void on became invisible. And we put some brackets and then some curly brackets. And basically this on became invisible function is a function built into Unity by default. It's not one we're creating from scratch now new. No, this is a built-in one that basically just checks if any object is no longer visible on the screen. So basically, if it's gone off the screen altogether. There's also on became visible, which is for when an object first arrives on screen, so you could do stuff that way. But when our lasers become invisible, i.e. when they leave the screen, we're just going to say destroy game object. So it'll just destroy the laser, so we don't have to worry about it anymore. So we'll save, we'll go back into the game, let it compile, and now when we press play, we shoot our lasers, they go off the screen, and as you can see now, over on the hierarchy, over on the left here, our lasers, as soon as they leave the screen, are being destroyed, and we're not being overwhelmed with loads of them in our game. So that's perfect, but you'll also notice, you could probably hear it there as we were playing the game, to fire loads of buttons in a row, we have to keep jamming on the fire button down, we have to keep pressing it, and we have to keep trying to go crazy, and eventually your finger's going to get tired. So rather than making our players have to press buttons over and over again the whole time, let's make it so that they'll automatically fire in a repeated kind of fashion. Okay, so to make our players be able to just fire lasers by holding down the button and letting multiple lasers keep on coming out of the front of our spaceship, what we'll do is add a simple looping kind of countdown to our code. And obviously to do that, we're going to need to have a value that will say how long we're going to take between each shot. So let's go into our script here, and we're first of all going to go to our player controller, and we're going to create a couple of variables here. We're going to create a public float shot delay. So shot delay will be how long we wait between each bullet that we fire. And then we're going to add below that a private float. Nope, that should be private. A private float shot counter. So shot delay we're going to set to be, say if we set it to be 0.2 of a second or something like that, whatever kind of feels good. But shot counter will be a number, that will be the number we actually use to count down constantly. And basically we'll set it so that whenever our shot counter gets below 0, then we can shoot a bullet out. So what we're going to do now is in our update loop here, so at the moment we have it that as soon as our player presses the button down, we fire off one bullet. So that's grand, we want to keep doing that, but we also want to make sure that just after we fire off that first bullet, we're going to set our shot counter to be equal to whatever our shot delay is. So say we have our shot delay set to be 0.2 of a second, our shot counter now will be set up to be 0.2. The next thing we're going to do is add another if statement and say if our input.get button for fire 1. And the reason we do this is because what we're checking here is the fire 1 button being held down at the moment. So we have get button down means the very first moment that you press it. Then we have get button for as long as the button is being held down. So if the button is being held down, what we want to do in here is say, okay, if the button is being held down, start counting down our timer. So our shot counter, we'll make that count down by saying shot counter minus equals time dot delta time. So we're taking away the amount of time it takes for each update frame of the screen to happen, and we're taking that away from our shot counter, and then as it gets lower and lower, we want to check and see should we fire a bullet yet. So how do we do that? We go if our shot counter, not shot delay, shot counter, if our shot counter is less than 0, actually less than or equal to 0. So if our shot counter is less than or equal to 0, basically what we want to say is, okay, we know we should fire off another bullet now. So let's copy this bit of code, instantiate our bullet, pop that in there, and then also let's reset our counter back up to where it should be full again, like this. So now every time it gets to this point, every time our shot counter goes below 0, it'll now say, okay, shot counter, you go back up to being 0.2, and then we'll, on the next update loop around through, we'll go, okay, take away some time from the shot counter. It probably won't be below 0 yet, so we'll just ignore this bit of code. Then we'll go back through the whole update loop again, and then we'll go to here and take away another bit of time over and over again, and eventually it'll get back down below 0. and we'll fire another bullet. That's the simple little loop we'll have going for this countdown timer here. So that's in place now. So let's save that and go back into our Unity project. We'll let it compile. We'll go to our player and we'll have to set a value for our shot delay. Over here, scroll down. So shot delay, like I said, we'll set it for 0.2. That seems reasonable enough. It might be a bit fast, but we'll find out in a second. Now we'll hit play. And if I just hold the button down, there we go. I think that's a reasonable steady stream of bullets, and it's a bit easier for our players to handle. And of course, if they want to fire a bit faster, they have the opportunity to go mad all they want. But if they want to just keep like a steady stream going, they now have this little shot delay. So it also adds an extra bit of a game mechanic where there's a reward for the players if they kind of hit the shoot button really fast. But if they're feeling that it's a bit too much work on their fingers, then they can just relax and just hold the button down and keep firing away. So perfect, it works just the way we want it to. And just to demonstrate it working as well, I'm just going to go over here and set the inspector to be in debug mode. So if I scroll down, you can see our shot counter here, and if you just keep your eye on it as we fire our bullets, I set the shot delay a bit higher, so we set it to 1 second, and if we hold it down, you can see the shot counter timing down as it goes, and every time it goes below 0, it pops back up to being 1. You can see it be 1 there for a fraction of a second. It doesn't stay there for very long. But there you go. It's working absolutely perfectly, just the way we want it to. So we have our lasers working nicely, but there's one other little tiny improvement we can make to them to make them feel a little bit better. So if I just press play here, and we'll start our game. If I fire against that asteroid, once it hits it, it kind of feels a bit bland that our lasers hit against the object and that's it. They just disappear. There's nothing else to be done. So let's make it a bit more interesting, and we're going to add a simple particle effect that will make our bullets seem like they're impacting and doing kind of not necessarily damage, but at least they're having some interaction with the world. So we're going to go to game object and we're going to go to particle system. So this creates a new particle system in the world. First thing we want to do is make sure that this is rotated the right way. By default, it's made to fit into 3D space. So it creates it with a rotation facing upwards. So we want to turn that off. We want to say the rotation on the x-axis should be 0. Now at the moment it's kind of appearing behind our plane in the background here. And what we should actually do is grab our plane, so our background image, and we're going to move this on the z-axis. We're going to move it so it's back. We'll move it back to say 10. Because unlike before where we could reorder things, we discussed it in one of the early videos. So say if I go to the player here, we could reorder things in the sorting layer and change how they appear. Because our plane is a 3D object, we need to push it further into the background so that it doesn't interact with anything in front of us that we don't want it to. So let's go back to our particle system. Now we're going to make a couple of other little changes to it here. I'm going to scroll down and we're going to go to our shape that we're emitting from, and we're going to change it from being a cone to being a circle. So it's much more of a 2D interaction that we're going with here. We're going to pull the radius of it down quite a bit. I'm going to move it. I'm going to move it over here just to make it, just have an idea of it in scale with the ship here. And then we're going to change our emission over here to be, instead of rate over time 10, we're going to set that to be 0. And what we're going to do is make it burst out a certain amount. So what will happen is every few seconds, because it's set up in the moment to be looping, it'll keep bursting out a few little objects. So what we're going to do is set it to be bursting between 5 and 7, like this. So it'll only create a little few, just like that. That's all we wanted to do, is create a few little bits of burst like that. Now we're going to make it so that they don't fly out anywhere near that far either. So let's set that up. So if we go to start speed here, we're going to set that down to be 2. So they just kind of go out like that. We're going to change the lifetime of these little kind of ball things to be 0.5. So they barely last for any length of time. Now our loop at the moment is taking ages to make new ones because we have duration set up to 5. So I'm just going to put that down to be 1. So we just can keep seeing them spawn out. Now it looks kind of weird at the moment that they appear and then they just kind of blink out of existence. So what we're going to do is make them shrink down as time goes along. And we can do that by scrolling down through our particle system over here. And if we go to size over lifetime and just hit the little tick beside it and then make it drop down by clicking on the name, just click on the big grey box here for size, and then down on the bottom where we have this little area here, grab this little diamond on the right hand side, the little red diamond here, and we click and drag that down to the very bottom. And what happens is, you see our little particles kind of shrink down as time goes on, so it looks like they're kind of fading out and dissipating rather than just blinking out of existence magically. So we'll scroll back up again here. The next thing we want to do is add some color into what these objects look like. So here where we have start color, I'm going to go and make this kind of a blue color, so it's a bit like our lasers. Actually more of this kind of blue here. But they kind of look a bit generic just all being blue like this, so we're going to add a tiny bit of variety into it by saying, instead of it just being this one start color, if we hit the little drop down beside the color, we can say it'll be random between two colors. So it'll be either that light blue or this other kind of darker blue. A little bit more actually than that. So now you can see we're getting a bit of variety in the blues that we see. But at the moment, the size that the particles are starting out at is quite big. They're probably like a bit bigger than our laser itself. So we're going to change the start size here. Where is it? Here we go. Instead of being 1, we'll put that down to be 0.25, like that. So now you see it's just this tiny little effect that we can see. We can zoom in a little bit more and see it. But that's all we need. We get this little impact that looks like, hey, this laser just hit an object in the world, and now it's kind of blasting out a little bit. So that's all perfectly fine. The only other thing we need to do is make sure we turn off looping, because we don't want our particle effects to be going over and over again. We want it to impact against the wall and do this little spray out, and that's it. We don't want it to keep spraying over and over and over again. So now that we've created this effect, let's go ahead and add it so that it happens when our laser bumps into something. So to do that, we'll obviously need it to be a prefab that we can reuse. So let's go and rename it first of all. We'll call it laser impact. I'm going to click and drag that into our prefabs folder, and it appears as this kind of box shape because there's no visual element part of it that we can see in the world, so it doesn't have anything to show here in our folder. So by default it just puts it in as this kind of square box. I'm going to delete it from the world itself, and then we're going to go into our bullet controller script and add the ability for that to be instantiated when we hit against anything. So to instantiate it, obviously we need to know what object we're instantiating. So we'll say public game object bullet impact. Nice and straightforward. And then what we'll need to do is, whenever we run into any kind of thing, we'll make it go, okay, we just hit against something, so we're going to destroy. So, we're going to destroy ourselves and make it look like we're destroying ourselves, basically. So whenever we hit against anything else, we're destroying ourselves here. So that's why we have our on trigger enter 2D in place. So just before we destroy ourselves, we're going to instantiate our bullet impact. And the position we're going to instantiate it at is wherever our laser currently is. So that'll be at our current transform.position. And we'll give it the transform.rotation as well of our laser. So nice and straightforward. We'll save that, pop back into Unity, and then we need to make sure we hook up our scripts. Oh, we got a bit of an error here on line 9. That should be a capital G. Just one of those small things that MonoDevelop doesn't correct sometimes, but that's okay. So we need to hook up those impacts into our lasers. So we'll go to our laser here in our prefabs, scroll down to where we have that slot now, and we'll drag our laser impact into there. And now when we press play, we should see when we hit that asteroid, you can see our little blast effect spreads out on impact. So perfect, that's exactly what we wanted to do, but there's one other problem happening now, which is all of these particle effects that we created have just filled up our world over here. That's no good. We don't want that. We don't want them staying forever. We only want them to last for about a second, which is how long they're alive in the world. So let's go ahead and create a very, very simple and quick script that will make sure that when those items are created in the world, they'll only last for a certain amount of time.